You don't think that's a contradiction?
No, it's not a contradiction at all, because the gospel writers are constantly
Contradicting each other?
No, even in the ancient world, divine revelation comes into a primitive, barbaric world which is full of a lot of really bad guys.
And God says, keep going.
No,
Keep it up. You're doing such a good job.
God does not say keep going.
The God that you believe in is acting like a tribal war god.
A Christian book has got to be understood in the way Christians understand it.
So just to ask a direct yes or no question, I'd appreciate a direct yes or no to this. The God that you believe in is the moral author of the universe. Morally justifiably commanded the slaughter of innocent children and women. Yes or no?
Check, check. 1, 2. We're just getting the YouTube live stream going, but thank you all for being here, nice and early. We're going to get going on YouTube, and we're about 15 minutes away from starting, so rock and roll. Feel free to just relax.
Hello, everyone.
This is Don Prager. He's up here doing a little pre-show chat with me today.
Yep. Travis and I, we've been talking for a while now, haven't we? We've met on Discord, what?
Well, you came in the StreamYard days. So Don was originally just someone who signed up to come on and have engage in a digital Pangburn discussion, and then eventually moved his way up the ranks, and now he's
pretty much, yeah. And
one of your co-host to our weekly show, the Pangburn Update. And what else do? You also help judge our Discord server, which is a huge job.
Yeah, on the Discord and on the update, we do the co-host show on the update, and we kind of talk about these topics. We go over it week by week, what's going on in the intellectual sphere, what people are talking about, and stuff like that. It's been fantastic.
If you guys want to join us, if you're ever looking for a place that you can go to online that you're going to get a good faith, helpful engagement with your ideas, and you like talking about different topics, like the topic tonight, is the Bible true? You can come into the Pangburn Discord server and find a conversation at any time throughout your day. If you work a night shift, or if you work somewhere where you're allowed to have, a conversation happening in your ear and you're able to talk, a lot of people do that on our Discord server. And it's for bricklayers or PhDs. We have a variety of different levels of education and skills and techniques. One is not better than the other in the Pangburn world. It's just everyone tries to engage in good faith and helpfulness. Those are the two kind of physical properties that hold the Pangburn universe together, and that's what we look for our speakers to bring to the table when they come and speak, and we'll be looking for that from Alex and Dinesh tonight.
Yeah, the main point is to find a small refuge away from all the toxicity that you end up finding around these topics, and the name calling and the unhelpfulness. And I think that's like what we try to do on the online space, and as well, I know this Travis's mission within these conversations that hopefully Alex and Dinesh will have tonight.
Yeah, well, I tell you, they were just hanging out doing a mic check here, and they are both pumped up and ready to go tonight. This truly is an intellectual rumble in the Bronx, and I think that this is going to be the biggest intellectual challenge for each of them tonight. And I know that's saying a lot because Alex is 25, but for those of you who aren't familiar with Alex and haven't been following what he's been doing, he's been going head-to-head with some seasoned veterans in this space, and he's been doing it extremely well, based on my opinion. And Dinesh, I mean, a lot of people would say that, like, when Dinesh went head-to-head with Christopher Hitchens, Dinesh came out on top because Hitchens did not address the presuppositional argument Hitchens didn't address the presuppositional argument that Dinesh was presenting. And I'm sure Alex will, because he's an academic philosopher. This is his domain. So this will be interesting. What are you expecting, Don?
I mean, I think that if you anyone's kept up with Alex's work, he recently was on Jordan Peterson's podcast, and what they talked about a lot was truth. And the question is the Bible true? Can go in many different directions. Like, which way is someone going to defend the truth? Are they going to go for like a archaeological, scientific truth, which we've seen many years, or are they going to take a much more metaphorical approach to truth? And there's a question: is the discussion going to are they going to be able to meet minds there, or not just talk past each other? And that's the difficulty in this conversation.
Right.
Is that each person comes from a different perspective, what they mean when they say that something is true.
Well, and when you start studying truth in the philosophical domain, you will realize there is this long list that outlines the different criterias of truth that all of us engage with throughout our day, whether we would like to admit it or not. Sometimes we just believe something to be true throughout our day because it's coherent to us. Sometimes for greater claims, we'll require a correspondence-like truth model, like we do in science. But also we'll make appeals to tradition. We will decide that we'll accept something as true simply because it's pragmatic to our purposes. So one thing I always try to say in all of the Q&As I do, all the discussions I do is look up, and it's a good place to start, the Wikipedia for criteria of truth or criterias of truth. And that is a really good place to go and investigate, especially when you come to hear a conversation like this, because then you'll realize that the matter of whether something is true or not might not be as black and white as we initially thought.
A lot of times we're kind of compelled when something just makes sense to us. We have like that feeling of, oh, aha, this makes sense to me all of a sudden, and then you believe it as true. Yeah. And that's just not, when you take a deeper investigation, that falls apart every time. You end up finding that it's not just because something makes sense to me, it's true. There are much more things for that, and that's what they're both going to discuss today.
Right. And and you know, you're going to get into a lot of these situations. Like behind us here, this is Michelangelo's the creation of man.
Right? In the Sistine Chapel, when he
yeah,
painted,
and this is at the top of the Sistine Chapel in a certain area. And, when you look at this, you think, is this true? Is it true that this happened? We have God being depicted as creating the first man, Adam. Is it true that this happened? Or at least what it's representing? Does anyone out there think that it is? Show of hands. Anyone? Not yet? They don't think that this is a true representation? Okay, that's fine. I think tonight Dinesh is going to argue that in a certain way this is true. And in a certain way, it is true that Jesus was literally resurrected. Now, it'll be interesting to see what point of view Dinesh tries to defend here tonight. But I think he will be on the defense to a lot of logical arguments, sound logical reasoning that Alex O'Connor is going to come from that point of view to try and attack those positions.
I think Alex might also get a bit into the minutia of the different types of truth that the Bible has presented throughout time and that different theologians have contended with, and maybe kind of force Dinesh to open up his mind. Are there other versions of truth I have to deal with? Right, other than the ones that I'm just trying to shoehorn? Is he going to just kind of bombard him with pluralities of truth, different types of truth to muddy the water, or just going to make a distinct argument? It's interesting to see. I can't wait.
I think it's quite amazing that at 25, Alex is getting this opportunity to kind of follow in the footsteps of Christopher Hitchens. If you guys haven't seen the conversation between Hitchens and SOUZA from 2010, I believe it was at Oxford. They went back and forth, and of course Dinesh's perspective was presenting the presuppositional argument, which presupposes the existence of God, and it's a way of presenting an ultimate faith position, starting
that God is necessary for us to make sense of anything to begin with, that we need to have God. But is he going to make the same thing when he talks about the Bible, that this needs to be true in order for us to make... I don't think he's going to go in that direction, do you?
Well, I mean, as an atheist, if I was sitting on stage with Dinesh, that would be... There's a lot of gold to be farmed in a conversation like that.
That's true.
For me... trying to take on the burden of these specific accounts, and then you get into authorship, right? A big thing for me that's where I haven't been able to accept the truths of the Bible in at least the colloquial sense of what's true is this problem of authorship, because we start asking who wrote this down? Okay, you're asking me to believe that they were divinely inspired when they did. Why do we believe that? Because they claimed it or someone else claimed it. So you're really putting your faith in that area, in my opinion. But I am first a fallibilist, right? Before anything else, I'm a fallibilist. I could be wrong about any belief I hold. So I am always open to changing my mind. And I think we should all listen carefully when we're taking in content like this, just to see if we've made any mistakes. And it's possible to me in my worldview that the Bible is true. Correspondently and coherently. I think it's highly unlikely, but I think
is it possible?
It's still possible.
I mean, There's stories like of Mice and Men, for example. I was recently rereading that book. Is it true of Mice and Men, the message in Of Mice and Men about the failure of the American dream? Maybe. Is that what we mean by truth? I don't know. When it comes to the historicity, I'm kind of with you there, so I don't really have much to say against it. But in general, Travis hints at an important thing about fallibilism. We just have to remember that we're humans, we're fallible, we make mistakes all the time, we believe things that are false all the time, every single day, because it just makes sense to us. And it's our job to make sure to step back a bit from our own cave ape nature. So.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Don, we should take a quick break here, and then we're going to get going with the headline discussion here in just a few minutes.
Yeah,
and
of
we'll
course.
let everyone get in. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you guys.
Check. Welcome back, everyone, to Pangburn. Thank you for making it out tonight. These events aren't possible unless people like yourselves come out and support them. And so I thank you very much for doing that. Hello to everyone on YouTube. Thanks for being with us. We have about 400 live right now, so thank you so much for being here live. And we will be releasing a video that has more production quality and the editing much more pristine at a later date, probably within a week. So this is fun. Is the Bible true? That's the question that's going to be up for examination tonight. How many of you think the Bible is true? Show of hands. 1, 2, a few of you. Yeah, great. And truth is an interesting thing. Once you start jumping into philosophy and you start studying the concept of truth, you're going to realize that it's not so black and white. At least the way that, we kind of have this colloquial idea of truth that deals with kind of like scientific truth. A lot of people think of truth in that way, something that will correspond with the objects in reality. You make a claim and the objects in reality correspond with that claim. But I think tonight we're going to see from Dinesh and Alex that truth isn't black and white. We're going to have 90 minutes of discussion, and after that we're going to have 20 minutes for a Q&A. So we only have 20 minutes, so make sure your questions are concise and you got them sorted out. Questions end in a question mark, as Matt Dillahunty always likes to say at our events. Yeah, we don't need your dissertation, but let's try to get through as many questions as we can. So without further ado, please welcome to the stage Alex O'Connor and Dinesh D'Souza.
Thanks, Travis. Great. Hi, everyone. I'm not really used to doing this kind of thing without a moderator, but we've had a conversation before coming out here, and we thought it would be good to sort of give each other 10 minutes each to lay out something of a case. We're not going to be too strict with that, but and then hopefully most of the time we can dedicate to just having a chat. Dinesh said that I can go first, which seems a little odd given that he's, I suppose, technically on proposition, but I wanted to lay out a few different ways that I interpret the question and see where he wants to take it. Some people said that I shouldn't do this debate with this question. It's kind of an impossible question. It's the kind of question that requires more of an explanation to ask than to answer, which is a little bit strange. So I thought, the Bible is not a book. It's a library, and like any good library, it contains an amalgamation of different genres. And so asking if the Bible is true, you might as well ask if the corpus of Shakespeare is true. It sort of betrays a misunderstanding of how people interact with the text. So I thought, will Dinesh argue that the Bible is literally true, historically true, allegorically true, morally true, theologically true, metaphorically true? And I suppose the only thing for it is to sort of try each one on for size. So maybe beginning with Genesis, in an attempt, clearly not at historicity, but rather allegory and metaphor, we can deal with one of our types of truth here. We're introduced to Adam and Eve, who are told in no uncertain terms by God not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You may begin to wonder why knowledge of good and evil is such a bad thing, but the thought is interrupted by the introduction of the serpent, who says to Eve, did God say that if you eat of the tree, then in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die? And Eve says, yes. And the serpent says, well, that's not going to happen. God just knows that if you eat of it, you'll become like him, knowing good and evil, and he doesn't want that. That's all. You're not going to die. So Eve famously takes the fruit, eats some, gives some to Adam, and what happens? Do they die in the day thereof? Some people say in a metaphorical sense, yes. We'll get to that in a second, but at least on the surface of it, no. What does happen? God tells us himself. He says, now the man has become like one of us, knowing good and evil. He must not be allowed to reach out his hand and eat from the tree of life, lest he inherit eternal life. And with this, Adam and Eve are banished from the Garden of Eden. So who's telling the truth here? This story is quite mystifying to me, and I'm not the first to point this out. There's actually an apocryphal gospel discovered near Nag Hammadi in Egypt in the 1940s, dated to around the 2nd or 3rd century, called the Testimony of Truth, a gospel that didn't make it into the New Testament, which identifies the serpent, interestingly, who's never called Satan in the text, by the way, identifies the serpent with Jesus. I don't know if I'd go quite that far, but it does seem that the sort of allegorical truth of the story leaves a lot to be desired. I'm told that maybe Adam and Eve died a sort of spiritual death, or mortality entered the world. But then we need to ask why it is that God had to proactively banish them from the Garden of Eden. This isn't some natural result of sin that, mortality entered the world. They're banished. And the implication is that they could have just as easily reached out and eaten from the tree of life, but God didn't want this to happen. So he guards the gates of Eden with a cherubim, with a flaming sword. I find this quite strange, and I'd like to know what Dinesh thinks of it. Moving on quickly, I suppose, to the events of the later Old Testament, skipping over Exodus, we're introduced to another form of truth that I want to potentially engage in, and that's the concept of moral truth. That's another one that I spoke about in the beginning just there, the concept of moral truth. When we look at some of the military conquests of the Old Testament, bear in mind that the Promised Land pledged to Abraham is not an empty plain. Its indigenous inhabitants had to be, shall we say, displaced by a series of military campaigns ordered by God and carried out by his prophets. Thus we have such commands as in Deuteronomy, chapter 20. When you march up to attack a city, make its people an offer of peace. Sounds promising to start with. If they accept and open their gates, all the people in it shall be subject to forced labor and shall work for you. Some peace. If they refuse to make peace and engage you in battle, which, why would they do that on these terms? Lay siege to that city. When the Lord your God delivers it into your hand, put to the sword all the men in it. As for the women, the children, and the livestock, and everything else in the city, they get to go... You may take these as plunder for yourselves, that's right. And you may use the plunder the Lord your God gives you from your enemies. Likewise, in 1 Samuel, we have the destruction of the Amalekites. There's the order, now go attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. I'm told sometimes that this is actually an exercise in hyperbole. God didn't mean everyone. It continues, do not spare them. Put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys. And if you think that this is hyperbole, consider what happens when Saul does conduct the destruction of the Amalekites as ordered, and decides to leave alive the king as well as some of the best of the livestock. He leaves them alive. For this small act of mercy, God responds by saying to the prophet Samuel, I regret that I have made Saul king because he's turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions. So not even the animals can escape this genocide. So I'd like to ask Dinesh, I suppose, directly, which is it? Is this a morally corrupt series of events, or do I have to dispel with my moral intuition that genocide, including of innocent children, is a bad thing? There's plenty more to talk about in that regard. I don't want to take up too much time. This isn't, of course, to mention the advocacy and explicit instructions around slavery in the Old Testament. Hopefully we can get onto those too, if we want to go down the moral path. But I think that the most natural interpretation of the question is the concept of historicity. The literal truth of the Bible, that is. This is where I think we have to move to the New Testament, because the genre of the Gospel seems to be historical biography, unlike the mythology of a book like the Psalms or Genesis or Job. And here there's a lot to talk about. We begin with the birth narratives. There are two birth narratives in the Gospels, in Matthew and Luke. Both give different accounts. Both have a genealogy of Jesus, for example, but the genealogies are different. I'm told this is because one records Mary's genealogy and one records Joseph's. You can do this if you like. It doesn't seem like the most natural reading of the text if you're not already predisposed to synchronize the accounts. Then we have, for example, the flight to Egypt, which is only recorded in Luke, which is difficult to reconcile with Matthew's account that they went to the temple in Jerusalem instead. But more importantly, Matthew then says that the family traveled to Nazareth, and he says, so was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he shall be called a Nazarene, quoting the prophets. Now you'll notice if you read an online Bible that where the Old Testament prophets are quoted, there's a little footnote telling you what the prophecy is. In this case, you won't find one, because the prophecy simply doesn't exist. It's not there. There's no such thing. So there are two options here. Either Matthew made up this prophecy or got it wrong, in which case the New Testament is mistaken, or the prophecy does exist, but for some reason fell out of our scriptural tradition and now no longer exists, which makes the accuracy and at least the completeness of the Old Testament suspect. So again, I'd like to ask directly which it is. Finally, I suppose I should mention the contradictions that a lot of people point to in the Gospels. Some of these, I think, are legitimate, some are not. I'll give you some examples very quickly of Gospel contradictions that I do think are real contradictions. First, the date of Jesus' crucifixion. Was it before the Passover, as John states, or was it after the Passover, as the Synoptic Gospels state? Second, Jesus is sending out his disciples to teach. In Mark, he tells them to take nothing with them except a staff. In Matthew and Luke, he says, take nothing with them, including no staff. So do they take a staff or do they not? A pedantic contradiction, but a contradiction nonetheless, and one that's led people like Barnabas, Ahern, to write entire articles on this. And Augustine himself actually distinguished between a literal staff and a metaphorical staff to explain this difference. Anything, I suppose, except considering the possibility of even the most minor of gospel contradictions. Third, Jesus flipping the tables at the temple. A famous story, but did you know that in the Gospel of John, this takes place at the beginning of Jesus' ministry? In the Synoptics, it takes place near the end. So when did that occur? Mary Magdalene, after the resurrection of Jesus, runs to the disciples in John's Gospel and says, they've taken the Lord, and we do not know where they have put him. Strange thing for her to say if, as the Gospel of Matthew recounts, she's visited by an angel at the tomb who tells her exactly where Jesus is going, and then she's met by Jesus herself on the way to the disciples to bring them the news. Strange for her to then say that they've taken the Lord and we do not know where they've put him. There's more to say on this. Interpolations, things which seem not to be in our oldest manuscripts but end up in newer manuscripts of the New Testament, such as the adulterous woman, let he who is without sin cast the first stone. Most scholars agree that this was not in our earliest manuscripts and was added in at a later date. And if we can see that the gospel stories were edited after they were written down, there's no reason to think that they couldn't be edited before they were written down as oral traditions too, as well as the entire ending of Mark 16. There's a longer version and a shorter version, because the longer version simply isn't in our earlier manuscripts. These documents don't seem to have the historical reliability either. So, in conclusion, I've probably spoken for too long here. Are we talking about allegorical truth, moral truth, metaphorical truth, theological truth, historical truth? I suppose what I want to say to Dinesh is take your pick, and I'll probably have something to say about it.
All right. Here we go. If you don't mind, I'm going to stand up. Is that okay?
Please.
Okay. I'm standing up because I want to kind of neutralize Alex's accent advantage. I mention this because it seems to me no accident that so many of the prominent so-called new atheists have British accents. I think this is really important to their credibility because think of it, if Hitchens and Dawkins and Alex were three Southern boys from Louisiana, would they have quite the same impact? I'm not sure. Anyway, this is why I'm standing. I was a little puzzled about this topic and kind of how to get at it because I've never debated this topic before. I'm not a theologian. I wouldn't even say I'm an expert on the Bible. I'm, I think, a believing and intelligent Christian. And so I have done a bunch of debates over the existence of God, over can God's omnipotence and benevolence be reconciled with evil in the world. Those topics appear to be philosophical topics. But when you're dealing with the Bible, you have a different kind of a work altogether. And I say this because in discussing if something is true or false, you have to ask what is it that the book is doing? Like, what's its purpose? What is it there for? Let's take an example of what I mean. Let's say if we were debating, is Shakespeare's Julius Caesar true or false? Now, Julius Caesar is a historical account. This is not one of Shakespeare's works of fiction. It's a historical drama. But because Shakespeare's interest is in drama, he emphasizes dramatic events and dramatic confrontation. He does not actually worry about trivial details, anachronisms. If an event occurs over here, Shakespeare does not hesitate to pull it in over here because of the dramatic impact is more powerful this way. And so imagine if someone were to come along and say, well, this is untrue because when one of the conspirators shows up to commit the crime, he is, according to Shakespeare, wearing a handkerchief. Well, handkerchiefs didn't really exist in the time of Julius Caesar. This is obviously something Shakespeare got right out of Shakespearean England, stuck it right in there, didn't care about doing that because his purpose is something else, to explore the nature of tyranny, for example. And so to bring the lens of saying this is anachronistic, well, you may or may not be right, but you're like missing the point of the whole book. And you're also missing the point of the author, and you're missing the point of the reader. Meaning the author's intention is not to worry about whether or not people in ancient Rome used handkerchiefs. The point of the author is to dramatize something about the essence of tyranny and conspiracy, and maybe the conflict between tyranny and freedom. And readers of the work, understanding that, have always taken it in that spirit. So, as I listen to Alex, I think to myself, let's think about the Bible, what kind of a book it is. Well, first of all, it is a book that exists sort of within a tradition and within a church. I mean, there was no Bible for 300 years, right? The early Christians get together in the 4th century, they put the Bible together. Now, there's already a flourishing church. In fact, right about that time, the Roman emperor will convert to Christianity. Christianity will become the state religion of Rome. And the Bible will become, this assembled Bible will become the handbook of this church. And so it is to this day. Now, that's one point. The second point is that the Bible is a very strange book to be asking this kind of a question about, because the Bible nowhere admits the legitimacy of this kind of inquiry. It's worth noting. The Bible is a book of declaration, I would say of revelation. It never tries to prove anything. It could, but with very rare exceptions, and even those exceptions are generally kind of feeble, it is a book of sort of bold proclamation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Boom. It's declared as something true. Now, I want to reflect on that for a moment. Before I do, let me say, if you think about that sentence by itself, it's a puzzle. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Obviously, somebody is writing this. But who? No one was there except God. And yet, the sentence does not say, in the beginning, I created the heavens and the earth. There's apparently an observer. And the observer is recording, and God is, in fact, in the narrative. God is, in fact, the subject of it. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So as I think about this statement, I think that, first of all, it is an astounding claim, completely counterintuitive. And by counterintuitive, I mean, well, I get most of my intuitions from Aristotle. Aristotle, using you could call it philosophical common sense, says the universe has always been around. It's always been here. You don't need an explanation for how it got started because it never got started. It's always existed. And the Greeks also believed, as you probably know, out of nothing can come nothing. So therefore, if you first had nothing, how can you get a universe? The Bible goes against this Greek tradition and states categorically, as a matter of fact, that first there was nothing, and then there was a universe because God made it. So there are some factual assertions here. The assertion that the universe had a beginning, the assertion that the universe, in a sense, came out of nothing, and of course the assertion that the universe was created by God. So we can, if we want to go down this road, I'm not going to do it right now, explore whether this astounding claim that was made by the ancient Jewish writers with no evidence at all, no empirical investigation, no scientific experiment, no attempt to measure the redshift of galaxies. Nevertheless, the ancient Hebrew writer says, we know this to be true because God told us. And now here we are, more than 2,000 years later, really more like 3,000 years later, and we're in a position to ask, is this claim true? So I'll defer that. I'm happy to discuss that, and probably will. But this is one way to think about whether what the Bible says is true. It's making these categorical assertions. And most of these assertions, I would argue, are in the domain of revelation. The Bible is, in fact, a revelation. A revelation. Right here we have a problem, because how does one approach a revelation philosophically? Alex, you just tell me when I'm out of time. Okay, I'm just going to go until you stop me.
3 minutes, I think.
I'm okay?
3 minutes or so.
I got 3 minutes. Oh, wow. It's just getting started. All right. I'll save some of my stuff. But let me just say this. What is the point of revelation at all? You know, we have a guy here who says he's a cosmic skeptic. Many of you probably think you're skeptics. And so you might ask, well, why the heck do we need revelations? We have reason. Well, turns out that here we are, flung into the world. And if we reflect upon this fact and reflect upon our place in the world, several important questions pop out that are the inevitable result of reason, but which reason is utterly incapable of answering. Not that reason has an answer to date, reason cannot answer. What are these questions? 1, why is there a world? 2, what is our purpose in it? Why are we here? 3, what happens after we die? 4, is our passionate concern with justice, with morality, with goodness, that is constantly betrayed in the actual life of the world, ever cosmically vindicated after the world or beyond the world? So I could go on, but I'm giving you 4 straightforward questions that no intelligent person, I think, can avoid having to raise, and yet to which there is no available or even conceivable answer. It's not as if there's no answer, but we'll get an answer tomorrow. Because let me put it this way. Let's take the question about life after death. And I'll close on this and open the door to further inquiry. Let's talk about life after death. Is there life after death, yes or no? Shakespeare says that death is the undiscovered country. No traveler who has gone there has ever come back. I think we probably have to agree with this. You might get some tiny hints from like near-death experiences, but by and large, we don't know. And not only do we not know, we have no way of knowing. The key point here is that probability, the absence of evidence is the evidence of absence. this is all gobbledygook. Because all of this is only based on prior experience. If you show me a guy and tell me he has 3 eyes, I won't believe you. Because I've seen thousands of people, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, and I've got a lot of experience, and based upon that, the probability that a guy can show up with 3 eyes may seem to me to be pretty low. But the question of life after death, if I think of an analogy for it, it's something more like the possibility of aliens. It's not even an exact analogy, but it's a similar analogy because if I say to Alex, you believe in aliens, there's no probabilistic way to say yes. We have nothing in our experience to go this way or that way. And here's my point. It is exactly when reason not only breaks down, but reason can't even go there, that revelation steps in and delivers an answer. And here we are debating, is that answer true? And the question I want us to think about, at least to get started tonight, with what tools are you going to deliver a true or false verdict on subjects that are outside the domain of reason itself? I mean, Immanuel Kant says on the first page of the Critique of Pure Reason, before we discuss the great reach, whether we discuss whether this is reasonable or that's not reasonable and when this is empirical, he goes, we first got to set the boundaries of reason. What is it that reason can and cannot know? Why? Because what Kant is basically getting at is that once you go beyond the reach of reason, faith is not unreasonable at all. Why? Because you have nothing else. So, what I want to emphasize here, and I'm happy to discuss all the specifics we've covered today, or Alex has covered today, but essentially, the Bible is something that is taught in church. It's a tool for ministry, for exhortation, to get people to live better lives, to help them deal with their life in the world. I have never heard a single pastor, for example, and I'm quite sure this doesn't happen in Jewish synagogues as well, going, you know what, let's go out and find the Amalekites of our day and kill them right now. Nobody says that. No one even thinks that. No one reads the passage that way. Nobody reads the passage of the fall in the way that Alex described it. And so we have a little bit of a problem. We got a book. It's a book that exists within a community for a purpose that the community is extremely clear about. This book is used every single Sunday millions of times and all around the world. It's used in Protestant and Catholic churches. Obviously, there are interpretive communities that differ on how things can be read and understood. There's also the whole separate question of the relationship of the Old Testament to the New. There's an old saying that goes that the New Testament is in the Old concealed. The Old Testament is in the New revealed. So the Old Testament and the New exist in a kind of odd relationship to each other. In fact, so odd that one party, the Jews, repudiates the relationship altogether. And from the Christian point of view, the Old Testament is incorporated but superseded by the New, and there are different ways of looking at that relationship which we can get into. Let me just close by saying this.
Rather a long 3 minutes there.
Oh, it's a rather long 3 minutes.
It's maybe you meant you'll finish soon in the way that Jesus promised.
No. Let me pause right here because
an ambiguous soon. But I'd love to question you on some of the things you've already said.
All right,
if you don't mind.
We will put the ball in your court. So I think what's going to happen now is we're going to go into discussion.
Hope so.
Right? Okay, and you're going to ask me some questions. We'll discuss, and I'll ask you some.
Sure, and I'm happy to essentially take the things that I said in my opening statement and slot them in and apply them to the things that you just said right there. So you began by saying that the Bible is a strange book to ask these questions of because of its purpose. I assume you'd agree with me that the Bible is a collection of books rather than a singular text, with different authors, different intentions, and most importantly, different genres. So the first question I suppose I'd like to ask you is, do you agree, for example, that at least some biblical texts are attempts at historical biography, such as in the Gospels.
Of course, I would agree with that. But let me just qualify it this way.
Sure.
When we think of the Bible as revealed, the question now becomes, what do we mean? Did God write the book? Did God inspire the book and human beings wrote it? Did God show human beings events that they then described in their own words? Okay, so the reason these things are important is, it seems to me, to answer the question I raised earlier about in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, the way I understand it is there's a perfect revelation shown to a gospel, to a Bible, to a Jewish scribe who sees it, so to speak, but writes it in his own words. When I look at the book of Revelation, same thing.
And does it get anything wrong? Do those scribes get anything wrong?
It's quite possible that they, when you say get anything wrong, they are writing it in human terms. I mean, you know...
But I mean the specifically mundane human things. I'm not talking about when the author of Genesis says that God created the heavens and the earth, or talks about the Spirit moving across the face of the water. This is clearly mythological. This is clearly an attempt at mythological writing. That's fine. It would be silly to ask if that's true or not. But when somebody...
I don't think it is mythological writing at all. I think that it is simply... I mean, put it this way. If we were, in the year 4000 BC, if we were John the Divine, and let's just say that God showed us in a vision the actual end of the world, right? Sure. Apocalypse. We would then write down the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, death and famine and destruction. We're not engaging in myth-making at all. I'm actually writing what I see.
So you think there'll be a 7-headed demon?
Of course not. I'm saying that to me, what I'm seeing is so, let's just say, for example, it is a thermonuclear explosion. Sure. of a kind that the ancient Bible writer doesn't even know what it is.
Yeah.
Right? And the consequence of it is death and destruction and famine. He's going to write it down the way he sees it.
But
right?
Where's he going to get the 7-headed dragon and the prostitute from?
This is
like a human attempt to describe a nuclear reaction?
Yes, because when words and images fail, metaphor is the actual conduit to truth.
Now, I'd understand if that were the case, if you said that perhaps after a nuclear blast, somebody describes it as, the gods of fire descending upon man with their flaming swords or something like that. But like a prostitute and a 7-headed dragon?
Well, first of all, I'm not saying it is a nuclear explosion. The problem is we're given this admittedly phantasmagorical future account, right?
Sure.
It is so wrenching and powerful that many people, for example, have tried to render it by art.
Yep.
And it's not easy to do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy to do it because we have to stop and realize, first of all, that we're dealing not only with the limitations of perception, but the limitations of language. Let me give you a simple example. I come to America from India. I have never eaten a mushroom. Okay? I ask you, Alex, what does a mushroom taste like?
Sure.
I would submit that you would be completely unable to render to me in words, however lengthy and ornate, what a mushroom actually tastes like.
That may be true, but I was asking, for example, about Jesus' presentation at the Temple of Jerusalem after his birth. This is not like trying to describe a mushroom or the end of the world.
No. Okay, so now let's talk about that.
Hold on a second. This is a historical event that's being recorded by one New Testament writer at the same time as another New Testament writer says that the family had traveled to Egypt. I don't think this is an attempt at metaphor or allegory, as I would say of Genesis. Whether you think that is or not, I would say that in the case of the Gospels, we can agree that on at least some instances, this is a clear attempt at mundane history. This is not an attempt at writing some kind of metaphor to explain a truth that's otherwise unknowable to the human mind. It's a very straightforward attempt to record what actually happened, and they contradict each other.
They contradict each other because they're written by 4 different people.
Sure.
So
one of them is wrong.
let me ask you this. If God were writing it, I'm quite sure he would have written it once. You would need 4.
Sure. So,
okay?
so some of them are wrong then?
No. Okay, so when you say they're wrong, let's consider Luke's gospel for a minute.
Yep.
Luke is a medical doctor. Luke is not present at the events being described.
Mm-hmm.
Luke is virtually in the position of Thucydides writing the Peloponnesian War. Now, Thucydides did fight in the war, but in most of the events described by Thucydides in the Peloponnesian War, he wasn't there.
Making them very unreliable, right?
No, on the contrary. It is, in fact, the most reliable account of the Peloponnesian War that historians have.
Let's not say that it is reliable, though.
No, it is. What I'm trying to say is that when you're talking about historicity, and you're talking about historicity now in the ancient world, you have to recognize that these people are not approaching it as modern historians. Luke is going around interviewing people.
So let me ask this very, very straightforwardly then.
Okay.
Luke says that after the birth of Jesus, the family fled to Egypt. Matthew says that they went to the Jerusalem temple. Are they both correct, or is one of them wrong?
Who the heck cares? I mean, look.
Well, I do, and so
well,
do
you
probably
do,
the
but,
people
but,
who
but,
are listening
let me,
to a debate
let me
about
say,
whether the
let me
Bible
say
is
why.
true.
Let me say why what you care about is not only trivial, but indicates a kind of unwillingness to try to get what the text is trying to communicate.
I'll tell you why I don't think it's trivial.
Why is
because
it
I think
not
that the
trivial?
reason why Luke may have invented the flight to Egypt, well, he tells us. Luke says, when he records the flight to Egypt, and then they return from Egypt, he says, this is so that we can fulfill the prophecy from Hosea chapter 11, out of Egypt I shall call my son. Now, in Hosea, God is talking here about the nation of Israel. At least in this case, unlike the Matthew prophecy, the prophecy actually exists and we can interrogate it. It seems to me like what Luke is doing here is attempting to display Jesus as the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. And in fact, he tells us that that's what he's doing. Therefore, if it is the case that Jesus didn't go to Egypt and didn't come out of Egypt on his return, then this would undermine Luke's attempts to identify Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. That's why I think it is relevant.
Well, look.
And not trivial.
Right, but I think that the...
Would you agree with that? I mean, do you think it's a completely trivial point? If it's so trivial,
No, I think that the point,
then why is it included in the first place?
point as you stated it before is trivial. The point you're now raising is not trivial, but the point you're now raising is one in which you have 3 centuries of Jewish-Christian disputation about whether Jesus is the Messiah, okay? And by and large, the disputation breaks down in this way. The Jews are the biblical literalists, and the Christians are the sort of metaphorical readers. And I say this because let's take a very famous passage that bears on this very topic, where Jesus is talking about the destruction of the temple. And the Jews go, you said the temple would be destroyed. Now, interestingly, Jesus did say the temple would be destroyed, and the temple was in fact destroyed in 70 AD. In fact, 40 years after Jesus said that, the temple was in fact physically razed to the ground, and the Jews dispersed in a huge diaspora. But my point is, Jesus doesn't reply that. Jesus doesn't say, hey, listen, wait 40 years. Jesus says, no, you're misreading me completely. When I said the temple, I was actually speaking of the temple of my body.
No, he doesn't tell them that.
But this is stated.
But we're told that that's what he means.
We're told that's what he means. So what I'm getting at is, here you have a case where you have an event, you have a Jewish literalist reading and a Christian metaphorical reading.
Yep.
Another example, and
So would you say then the flight to Egypt is a metaphor? Is that what you're trying to say? In other words, I'm trying to understand what it is that you're doing here to actually answer the question that I'm asking you, which is about, because here's my theory, here's an idea.
Okay.
Luke, the author of Luke, invents the flight to Egypt in order to identify Jesus as the Jewish Messiah, meaning that when we read Luke, we should note that where it appears that he's making historical claims, we should note his willingness to twist history in order to fulfill a theological
you don't know
aim.
if he's doing that. You're assuming that. This is your theory.
No. What I'm saying is that that's one thesis to explain the contradiction between Luke and Matthew. If you want to say that it's trivial, then fine, but we still have to explain how it comes about. And what I'm saying is one idea of how this comes about leads to us undermining our trustworthiness of Luke. What I'm asking you for is your explanation that would not lead to us having to undermine the trustworthiness of Luke.
I don't have the ability to referee that passage. I'm not aware of this contradiction. I'll have to go back and look and see.
That's fine.
Go and look it up. But what I am doing is I'm questioning your methodology and your kind of what would I call it? You got the Jews and the Christians arguing about events, and they're very complex events, and they're very powerfully meaningful events. Like let's take, for example, Abraham and Isaac are going up the mountain. Mm-hmm. And Isaac says to Abraham something to the effect of, where is the lamb for the sacrifice? And Abraham says to him, God will provide. God will provide. Now, in a Jewish reading, this whole thing has got to be understood in terms of, here's Abraham, he's willing to sacrifice his son, God says stop, it's a tale of obedience. In the Christian reading, it's not that, or it's not only that. The Christian reading is, Jesus is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. So when Isaac says, where's the lamb? And Abraham says, God will provide, it is a foreshadowing of a significant event in the New Testament. Now again, as I say, the Jews and the Christians argued this for 3 centuries and more. I'm not even trying to adjudicate who's right, but I'm saying you're waltzing in, coming with neither of these two assumptions. In fact, I assume you think that the Old Testament is as mythological as the New.
No.
Okay.
Sorry, I need to.
And I guess what I'm saying is that people who read the Bible to understand what the Bible is trying to say and what we can learn from it, do what the Jewish rabbis did and do what theologians like Augustine and Anselm and so many others have done. They don't really do what you're doing, which is saying, hey, Luke must have talked to a guy who thought it happened over here, but in fact, this guy says the roof was thatched, but another guy says they let the guy in through the roof who had to be healed. Contradiction. Yep. And I'm like, is this your way of trying to say the Bible is not true?
Yes, it is. Yes. Okay. That's precisely what I'm doing. The Old Testament is not fully mythological. I think Genesis is mythological. I think that Exodus makes more of an attempt at history, but has mythological undertones. I think that the military conquests I mentioned in my opening statements are attempts at describing literal historical events. I think that the Psalms are poetry. I think that Job is mythology. I don't think a man called Job actually existed, right? And so there are lots of different genres here. The reason I'm asking about the contradictions in the gospel, and I understand if you don't want to talk about the specific example of Egypt and Jerusalem, fine, whatever. Maybe you can send me an email about it later or something, that's fine. But the reason I bring it up is to say that there are lots of these. And in each case, if we try to look at why they might be contradicting each other, the reasons I think we're given tell us that the historicity of this text should be in dispute. For example, I mentioned the date of Jesus' death. The Synoptic Gospels specifically place this after the Passover meal. They have the Last Supper as the Passover meal. Okay. John uniquely sets it before the Passover because he has the theological purpose of wanting to depict Jesus as the Passover lamb. Mm-hmm. Now, this is a contradiction if the Gospels are supposed to be historical accounts of what happened to Jesus, which I imagine if we were having a debate about whether Christianity were true, about whether the God of the Bible existed, you might put forward, say, an argument for the resurrection of Jesus. You might say, well, we have good historical evidence to think that Jesus rose from the dead, and you might point to the story of the crucifixion and the disciples seeing him after he died. This is a common thread. The problem is that if we're treating it as historical in an area like that, then we have to engage with it as a historical text. Why would they contradict each other? I would say for the same reason that Luke contradicts Matthew in the birth narratives, because they're attempting to make a theological point, which tells us at least, and maybe you think that the New Testament is an entirely theological and in no way a historical text. Would you agree at least that the New Testament writers are seemingly willing to adapt the historicity of an event in order to serve a theological point? Would you agree with that? Yes and no. I would agree that... Well, that definitely is a contradiction. Well, it's not a contradiction, because, Thucydides is relaying historical events to make a moral point about the nature of politics, and both are completely consistent with each other. Sure. It's not as if Thucydides is... So he's a student of power politics. He is making a point. His speeches are driven at making a point, but the point is excavated out of the actual events. Now, I think that there's a reason that we're given 4 perspectival accounts of Jesus' life. And they're not identical. In fact, as I say, if they were identical, you wouldn't need 4. The point of reading these, and I think the way to read them. Let me say a word. If you want to determine veracity, you have to operate a little bit like a jury, and by that I mean pick up the Gospel of Mark, the first of the Gospels. Now, by the way, these Gospels are written
very proximate to the events they describe. And I say this by the standards of, we're talking about historicity of any historical document.
70 AD, would you say, for Mark?
Yes, I mean, I would say within decades of the events that they describe.
But crucially, would you agree with most historians that this happened, for example, after the destruction of the Jerusalem temple, thereby allowing the author of Mark to put the prediction in the words of Jesus' mouth without it being anything miraculous?
This is a highly debated point because Mark's gospel leaves off incomplete and has what seems to be at the very end an added section. I don't want to debate that little fragment of Mark. Here's what I'm getting at. If you've never read the Bible, and we've all read the Bible in a way, I was raised Catholic, and so I was habituated to going to Sunday Mass and sort of felt like I didn't know the Bible. I've heard these stories read and so on. But it was a completely different experience for me as an adult to go back with critical skepticism and just read the book of Mark straight through. It has the complete ring of authenticity. And I say this because not only does it give you little details that don't really seem to even belong there. It's clearly not written with a polemical purpose exclusively. Mark will tell you things that not only seem irrelevant, but at other times undermine what he's trying to say. And that is the true ring of authenticity. Because if someone were to... What's that?
An example?
Well, here's an example. In the Jewish tradition, the testimony of a woman was considered inherently suspect, but the testimony of men generally reliable. And therefore, not that the testimony of women was disregarded altogether, but you needed, for example, many women to say the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, the Gospels tell us that when Jesus was crucified and put in the tomb, if I were Mark or I were Luke and I were trying to be inventive and I were trying to establish a truth for posterity, I would not have it that a group of, let's just say, hysterical women, Mary Magdalene, whoever it was, a group of women go to the tomb and they're the ones who find the tomb empty. This is like a little dubious because most people are going to go, well, yeah, we know, but women, So here's an example of the Gospels insisting upon a point that would only make sense if that was actually the way it happened.
Allow me to answer that, if I may.
Go ahead.
If I may. This is a commonly presented argument for the historicity of the resurrection, which, by the way, now we're talking as...
Well, I'm not... No, hold on. I didn't say it's an argument for the historicity of the resurrection. I said it was an argument...
Let me say a word.
Okay.
Now we're talking about these texts as if they are historical texts. And the thing about the women is, look, this is quite straightforward to me. Who anoints bodies? Who goes to tombs and anoints bodies after someone dies? It's not men, it's women. And so if the authors of the Gospels had the men go to the tomb to anoint the body, which is what Mary and the other women were doing when they went to the tomb, that itself would be very strange and give us reason to doubt the historicity of the events. In other words, it's like if there's a task that women do, and that task is how Jesus' empty tomb is discovered, then why would he invent it? Why would they invent a story that has men going and doing it? Secondly, you said that you need multiple women's testimony. How many women go to the tomb? Multiple. Thirdly, what do the women do immediately after seeing the empty tomb? They run and tell the men who come and verify it for us. Right. So I don't think that this is this fulfills the criterion of embarrassment at all. In fact, I think the opposite is true. I think that if this was an invented story, I'm not saying it is, by the way, but if it were, then of course we could expect the people who discover the empty tomb to be women, because it's women who go to anoint the body at the tomb.
Okay, so let's put together what I just said and you just said, and let's ask the question, based upon what you said and what I said, did it happen that way? And I would submit that what you have done, see, you're doing special pleadings. You could argue I'm doing special pleadings, but I would admit that the thrust of the Bible and the thrust of the story is in fact aimed at delivering a truth from Revelation.
That's fine.
What you're trying to do is saying, all right, I can't contest that because that's outside the domain of reason, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to adopt sort of the nitpicking strategy, and because we got 4 accounts, I'm going to...
Hold on, you're the one who brought that up. You're the one who said that
I did.
Women discovering
and
the tomb...
And I'm saying nothing you've said has even slightly refuted it.
You don't think anything I just said refuted the idea that that would be something you wouldn't expect from the gospel authors if it were invented?
No, here's what I'm saying. I'm saying that I mean, let's look at what we agree on, what we disagree on. You agree that in that culture, the testimony of women in general counts for less.
I think this is something that Josephus tells us, but it's impossible to know what sort of culturally people actually thought at the time. It's impossible for us to know. But I'm happy to grant it, yeah, sure.
It's impossible for us to know, even though Josephus says it. Okay,
well, that's in a court of law, right?
No, but what I'm saying is, if you're applying the "is it impossible for us to know," I would suggest to you it is impossible for us to know that it was the absolute and unwavering duty of women to provide all the ointments. You've stated that as a fact.
No,
I would say it's impossible for us to know.
What I'm saying is that if somebody's reading this text and you say, well, if this were invented, why would it be women who discover the tomb? That would be embarrassing for them, the so-called embarrassment criterion. I'm saying, would it not be just, is not the fact that we're told why they're going to the tomb to anoint the body, is this not just reason enough?
No.
I mean, look, I'm not the one claiming I know how this went down, by the way. And also, you just accused me a second ago of special pleading. I wanted to ask you what it was that I'm specially pleading.
Well, what I'm saying is that you have an event. Mm-hmm. These events are described with great precision, mm-hmm. and a sort of eyewitness presence there. Now, we know in some cases there weren't eyewitnesses, but they're nevertheless described, this is the way it happened. And 4 guys are telling you their point of view, right?
Yeah, none of them the women who actually discovered the tomb, by the way.
No, you're not hearing from the women, I agree. You're 4 male gospel writers, apparently. I lost my train of thought for a second, sorry.
I also don't want to get too caught up on this specific example, but I suppose we'll have to sort of leave it with the audience in the live stream. The point that I'm trying to make is that the historicity of at least some of this is important for Christianity. The historicity of the life of Jesus. Like if it were discovered historically speaking that a man called Jesus never existed, that would completely undermine Christianity.
Are you saying
important.
that?
No, I'm not saying that.
Okay.
Of course I'm not saying
Let me ask you a different question.
I'm saying that historically it matters. The crucifixion, the resurrection, these are matters which historically matter to Christians. And so when we're dealing with a historical account of what happened, when they're riddled with contradictions, I think that that's a problem. If you don't think that's a problem, then that's fine. But I think that the people listening and wanting to find out if the Bible is true might see that as reason to undermine the trust of the text.
No, first of all, almost everything that we know about those events in terms of modern historical reliability, for example, where is the site of Jesus' crucifixion? Yeah. Unknown.
Allegedly
disputed. There are a couple of potential sites, but it's not known. What day of the year was Jesus born? Unknown. Mm-hmm. We think Jesus lived for 33 years, but let's say that one of the Gospels said it was 33 and the other one said it was 34. Do you think that would actually refute Christianity?
No.
No, it would not.
No.
It would actually be quite understandable that you'd have 2 guys. And they would get that, and they'd be off on that, and this contradiction would be trivial because the issue is not whether Jesus lived for 33 or 34 years old.
Right, that's a different kind. Because if you could tell me that the reason why they had specifically chosen those ages was to serve a theological point, knowing that they're willing to sort of adapt history in order to make a theological point. I wouldn't say that point alone undermines Christianity. What I would say is that it undermines our trustworthiness in the Bible. I'm not saying that any one of these contradictions can tell us Christianity is false. Of course not.
But I'm saying
firstly, the question is not if Christianity is true, it's whether the Bible is true. It may be the case that a man called Jesus came down to earth, rose from the dead. It's just that the gospel accounts get the details wrong, which mean that the Bible is not correct, but the story that the Bible tells is true. It means that Christianity is true, but the Bible is false. That's perfectly consistent.
I'm simply saying that what you're doing is you are supplying a motive that is completely made up, and that I could engage in exactly, let's just take, for example, the 33 versus the 34 years. Now, here's what I'm saying. If there was such a contradiction and I were being you, I would say, the reason that Matthew said it was 33 is because 3 is the number of the Trinity. And so 33 has a certain theological resonance because 3 and 3 is 33. Hold on. And then I would come around and say, well, the reason the other guy said 34 is actually 3 plus 4 is 7. God made the world in 7 days. 7 is known to be a number fraught with theological significance. And I'm saying this is basically Alex BS.
Dinesh, the gospel writers tell us that's why it happened. They say that the reason the family went to Egypt was to fulfill the prophecy of Hosea.
Okay, and so you, so
in other words, if the gospel writer, and now imagine that the gospel writers had written what you just said. Imagine in the actual texts, one of them said he was 33 when he died because of the number 3 in its significance.
Correct.
And another said that he was 34 because of the number 4 in its significance. That would be a contradiction. And in that instance, not just a historical contradiction, but a spiritual and theological one too.
actually, no, it actually wouldn't.
Oh, come on.
It wouldn't. I'll
How
tell
would
you
that-
why.
You don't think that's a contradiction?
No, it's not a contradiction at all, because the gospel writers are constantly
Contradicting each other?
No, drawing, not contradicting each other. If they were constantly contradicting each other, you wouldn't have spent half an hour on a single event that, frankly, I haven't even heard of. In fact, no one's ever heard of. I've never ever heard anyone discuss this in any context. So
Which event?
This prophecy about Hosea. I'll go back and look at all this. But what I'm trying to get at is, if you had a plethora of contradictions, you wouldn't be spending the entire debate on one that I'm sure no one in the audience has heard of either.
Hold on.
But okay, you've heard of it. Probably because you've been listening to his YouTube channel, right?
You don't think that this is a highly discussed point of contention in the Gospels, the flight to Egypt and its contradiction with
the flight to Egypt. Look, the flight to Egypt is an important event in the Gospel. I'm not saying.
Dinesh, also you said, why could you only bring up this one example? Take your pick. The date of Jesus' crucifixion, whether they're to take a staff or not to take a staff, the dating of Jesus flipping the tables at the temple, Mary Magdalene and what she says at the tomb, when the temple curtain rips. In the Gospel of Luke, it says that this happens before Jesus' death, and in the Gospels of Matthew and Mark, it says that it happens afterwards. We can go through any of these contradictions that you like, but the problem is that what you're going to tell me is that it's trivial, and then when I try to explain that it's not trivial, you say, I haven't even heard of it, and no one else really cares about this. When other people do, by the way, this is a highly discussed point of contention in the Gospel. All I'm asking you to do is say that this is... when I mentioned the staff in my opening statement, and I said that whether or not they take a staff is a totally trivial contradiction, I'm not bothered by that. If I were a Christian, I would say, yeah, of course, because the texts are not going to perfectly accord. But for some reason, Augustine could not accept this, and so comes up with this ludicrous idea of a literal staff and a metaphorical staff that Jesus is talking about. If you were willing to just say, yes, this is a contradiction, but that doesn't upset the method of Christianity, I think it would be a much more defensible and respectable approach. But instead it seems that you're unwilling to admit that there's even a single contradiction in these texts.
I am saying that the texts are written from 4 different points of view.
But do they contradict each
other? And it is quite possible that on details, Matthew tells you things that are not in Mark or different than Mark. Contradict Mark.
Contradict Mark.
Yes, contradict Mark. And so the point is, here's my point. You're acting... look at it this way. You would be scoring a point if you could say, God wrote 4 books and they contradict each other. Just like if you're able to say, Dinesh said this in the beginning of the debate and that at the end of the debate, Dinesh is contradicting himself. On the other hand, if we have 2 guys who are here today to go and write an account of this debate, right? And then we look at their accounts, which are authentic, first person, I was their account with a lot of detail.
Yep.
And one guy says, for example, the lights were dark. The other guy says the lights were dim. Or one guy says, for example, that Dinesh was sitting at a 45-degree angle. Another guy says it was a 50-degree angle.
Yeah. But
These are not...
Now imagine...
And then someone goes, Dinesh was sitting at a 43.5-degree angle because he thought this was a way of maximizing his rhetorical effectiveness for the audience. People would be like...
Now imagine somebody said, Alex was wearing a blue jacket, and the reason he was wearing a blue jacket... someone said it's a blue jacket, someone else said it's a red jacket. Who cares? You're quite right. But if somebody said specifically, I know that the reason he was wearing a blue jacket was because there's an upcoming election in the UK that's just been announced, and he was trying to represent the Conservative Party. And somebody else said, I know that the reason he was wearing red, and in fact he told us himself that the reason he was wearing red is because he wanted to support Labour in the upcoming general election in his home country.
Okay, perfect
You would
example.
say, that is a contradiction and means that one of you wasn't paying close enough attention, not just to the colour of my jacket, but the very message that I was trying to get across.
That could well be true, but what I'm getting at is we know, just from normal experience, that if the 2 of us are sitting in a cafe and we see an accident, these kinds of differences are normal. So let's just say, for example, here's God showing us a revelation, and the revelation can be whatever it is, and you and I write an account of it, and somebody finds that my account of it not only is different than yours, but let's just say, for example, I go, oh, Jesus was wearing a cloak. Another guy goes, he's wearing a robe. For anyone to actually think that this is, in fact, a refutation of the truth of the Bible, is ludicrous. So anyway, in our format, we've agreed to do a flip where you've been asking me questions. Now let me ask you something.
If you've got something to ask.
Let me turn around and ask you questions in a sort of what I think is a more fundamental mode, because it gets to what the Bible really is.
Let's hear it.
Do you think that the universe had a beginning?
I don't know.
You don't know?
I would suspect yes.
You suspect yes?
Yeah, sure.
How did the writers of the book of Genesis know that?
I have no idea. If I'm going to be
they guessed?
If I'm going to be cynical about this, if they did guess, it would be a 50-50 guess. And I also think that if we had scientific...
Would it be a 50-50 guess?
Yeah, and it might even be worse than that for you, because if we had some kind of scientific popular hypothesis, because of course the Big Bang might not have been the beginning of everything, who knows, right? But like whatever the popular scientific hypothesis is, if it were pointing to an infinite universe, for example, as Einstein thought we lived in, then I'm sure that people would open Genesis. They would say that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and say that the earth just means the earth itself, right? Like I think it would be equally easily interpretable on either account.
All right. So one of my professors at Dartmouth was Robert Jastrow. He headed the Mount Wilson Laboratory, one of the great astronomers of the 20th century.
Sure.
So Jastrow writes in his book, God and the Astronomers, that for 250 years, modern science has been attempting to discover whether the universe had a beginning. Mm-hmm. And you can think of these scientists as ascending a very tall mountain in which there are many pathways. And for many years, with the steady state hypothesis and so on, there were beliefs that the universe was eternal, it never had a beginning. In fact, that was the prevailing point of view. And then Jastrow argues it's almost as if we reached the top of the mountain and there was a bunch of Hebrew prophets or theologians sitting there who had been there from the beginning. So I'm describing now a skeptic, a true skeptic, and a true scientist describing the scientific shock that attends to a discovery that, and I think it is out of the spirit of that discovery for you to go, oh yeah, I mean, it could have been this. It's like tossing a coin. It isn't like tossing a coin. This is a question that's been argued for 2 centuries and only resolved in the last several decades. And resolved decisively in one side and the other. And the fact that you're not willing to just straight out say, yeah, it is actually an astounding fact that we now know.
No. I mean, look, the scientific method has also revealed to us that the Earth was formed about 4.5 billion years ago. That is much later than the sun. The Old Testament account, the Hebrew Bible account, tells us that it was the other way around. So it got that bit wrong.
All right. So we're, yes, the Bible is not.
So sometimes it gets things right. Sometimes it gets things wrong. You know.
The Bible is not a science. It's not listing out a scientific.
Well, now hold on a second. You can't now move the goalpost, especially if you're still gonna miss.
The issue. The issue of the origin of the universe is extremely critical.
You just told me that Genesis predicted, or knew about, or somehow knew about the scientific hypothesis of the origin of the universe. Then, when I pointed out another scientific observation that doesn't accord with Genesis, you tell me that Genesis isn't a scientific text to begin with.
Well, if you read Genesis, it is making a astounding claim, which pertains to God. Obviously, God created the heavens and the earth.
Is it making a scientific claim or not? Is it telling us how the universe scientifically formed or not?
It's not telling us how the universe scientifically formed, because if it did, they would be outlining the history of the Big Bang.
Then what's the relevance of bringing this up in the first place?
Because it is stating a conclusion, not a process. It's not telling you how the universe was formed. Right. It's not telling you about...
It also doesn't tell us how the sun was formed, but it tells us that it was formed after the earth was. It tells us that that's the case. That's wrong. It's incorrect.
Show me.
I don't have a Bible.
Okay. Well, I've read that passage maybe a dozen times. I have never spotted this contradiction that you're describing. But I'll go back and look at it again. Right. But again,
on what day is it that God makes the sun? And day 4. Is day 3 or day 4, something around there?
You're right, but
when's
the
light
mainstream
created?
of the Christian tradition does.
It
obviously can't be day 4 because the concept of day in the original Hebrew doesn't mean day.
Sure, but day 4 comes after day 1, right?
It's describing obviously epochs or periods.
Yeah,
yes.
So actually it's much worse, because now the sun is created much later than the earth was.
Well, not necessarily. Well, show me.
I don't know. I mean, we can read through that. We can find Genesis.
Yeah,
if you
okay.
like. I don't know if that would be the best use of our time. I mean, we could do it if you really want to. But what I'm trying to say is that like, it's not astonishing.
Let's move on.
Why not? It's not astonishing to me that like if you're making claims about the origin of the universe, especially in the case where if it is making a specific claim in the knowledge that there's a sort of infinite hypothesis and a beginning hypothesis, to take a 50-50 stab, it's not amazing to me. It would be more amazing to me if everything lined up and it gave us an otherwise unknowable historical scientific account of the beginning of the universe. But as you say, that's not even what Genesis is trying to do. So I don't. In other words, I don't understand how this even
I'm not
pertains to
saying
the
that
motion.
Genesis is trying to unfurl I'm saying that Genesis is making a statement about creation, and the statement about creation has a very startling scientific implication. Because if there was a creation, then there obviously wasn't something,
Sure.
and then there was something.
But I mean, it's not just science which can tell us that the universe had a beginning. I mean, like, there are lots of philosophical arguments that people have made, perhaps most famously Al-Ghazali, who argues against, for the impossibility of a past infinite universe, and I think does so quite convincingly, with no reference to redshifting and no reference to scientific hypotheses. So it's perfectly possible for somebody to take a pretty studious and educated guess at the fact that the universe had a beginning long before the scientific method told us that was the case.
I'm not saying that it's not possible to make philosophical arguments, and of course, as you know, there was a tradition in ancient Greece of making philosophical arguments all over the place.
So maybe that's why
let me keep going. It's my time. Let me pose questions.
I'm trying to answer your question. Maybe if you ask me how would they know, isn't this astounding? I would say, well, maybe they just had a philosophical tradition that taught a beginning of the universe, and that's where they got it from.
Except that
it's not inconceivable.
It's not inconceivable, but it's not likely, because when we think of the tradition of Western civilization, we speak of Athens and Jerusalem. We speak of the origins of philosophy starting in about the 8th century BCE, and then really developing first in Greece. And then we talk about the tradition of revelation developing in ancient Jerusalem. Yep. So was there a hidden philosophical tradition? Possible, but probably unlikely. Okay. Let's proceed to the issue of the veracity of some of the historical events described in the Bible. Mm-hmm. Would you say that figures like Jeremiah, David, are these historical figures or mythological figures?
I'd say I don't know for certain, but I would say that the Bible is certainly attempting to paint them as historical figures.
Forget what it's attempting to do. You've been trying to.
So I don't know. But
you don't know.
I'm
no idea.
happy to say yes.
Okay. So on a.
I mean, I would predict yes. I would say yes.
You would say yes.
That's what I would imagine. Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that Sodom and Gomorrah are historical cities?
Probably, yeah.
Probably yes. Yeah. Would you say that Pontius Pilate was a real person?
Yes.
Yes.
Sure.
Okay. Would you say that? All right. Now, these statements that you're saying now. Mm-hmm. Were in no way known to be true mm-hmm. until recent decades.
Some of those, I'm not sure.
All the ones I mentioned.
If you're talking about like archaeology,
I'm talking biblical archaeology. Let me give you an example of what we're talking about.
Archaeology can't prove the historical existence of a person very easily.
Well, let me go into this a little bit here.
And also, I want to make sure we're using the time wisely here. You could give me a sound archaeological bit of evidence that all of these people existed that is in no way tells us about the truth of the stories that are attributed to them.
No, it does. Well, let me put it this way. For many centuries, mm-hmm. This is a whole tradition of biblical scholarship in the 19th century. In fact, really until in some cases 10, 15, or 20 years ago, there was absolutely no evidence historically for the existence, for example, of a Hezekiah, mm-hmm. Jeremiah, David, let alone actual locations for David's palace.
Sure. Hezekiah's tomb.
All right. Hezekiah's
his tunnels.
Tunnels. Now, let me tell you something I discovered. I was getting a tour recently, a few months ago, in Israel from the guys at Hebrew University, and they were talking about an archaeologist named Elliot Mazar, who's what she calls herself a biblical archaeologist. She's not a Christian or even a believer, mm-hmm. but the way that she does archaeology is this. She has the Bible in one hand and the sort of the pickaxe in the other. And the approach to it is pretty simple. It is, I want to find David's palace. Now, no one has ever heard of David's palace is in the Bible, but there's no independent corroboration of it at all. There's a foundation in Jerusalem called the City of David Foundation. They have a little office. Dr. Elliot Mazar walks in their office and says to them, you have to move your office because the palace of David is in the ground underneath your office. And these guys are like, how would you know that? And Dr. Mazar says, because if you read the Bible, it will tell you that David, when he built his palace, brought in Phoenician builders who brought materials from Phoenicia and also brought Phoenician building expertise. The Phoenicians were apparently the builders of the day. And so Dr. Mazar says, we have found Phoenician seals, Phoenician coins, Phoenician inscriptions here. And so I predict that the palace is right underneath here because the Bible tells me that that's how that palace was built. So
David's palace exists?
David's palace is there for you to see today,
okay.
And it is in the exact location of where it was said to be. And what I'm getting at is the archaeological approach here is to use the Bible as an archaeological tool. The location of Sodom and Gomorrah. There was a lot of speculation that said Sodom and Gomorrah were cities over here or cities over there, but actually makes no sense because A, what we know about Sodom and Gomorrah is that they were once flourishing cities. 2, they were burned to ashes. 3, Abraham supposedly could see the smoke from a long ways away. And so these locations of Sodom and Gomorrah were never found until recently. By recently, I mean recent decades. An archaeologist, again in the Elliot Mazar tradition, takes the Bible and says, for Sodom and Gomorrah to exist, it's not enough to just go looking and see if we find stuff and go, hey, is this Sodom and Gomorrah? Let's actually follow the tracks of the Bible. Let's follow the map provided admittedly in very sketchy terms. The Bible is not trying to give you a map, but it's giving you clues. And based on these clues, the actual Sodom and Gomorrah is located, and you dig into it, and guess what? You find the remains of an ancient city, and you also find ash and debris. In other words, there was an ancient city there. It was completely burned to the ground. So one of the great cities of the ancient world then becomes an absolute nothing, and has been an absolute nothing since. And not only does the Bible describe these events, but it says exactly that. That these great cities will cease to exist and will never be resurrected again as they have not been to this day.
If I may, because I'm beginning to suspect this isn't a question, I might just jump in here. Sure, yeah, okay, so the authors of the Hebrew Bible.
My conclusion.
So if I might answer the question. I mean, it is your time, but I need to be able to speak as well. The Bible contains accurate data about where archaeologically we can find the ruins of ancient cities. Okay, that's not too extraordinary to me. I have no problem saying that the people who wrote these texts knew where these places were with exact precision. And in fact, notice what's happening. Notice what's happening, in my view. What's happening is that the Bible is a historical text and a scientific text when it needs to be, and it's not one when you don't want it to be. So when I said a moment ago, here's a relatively mundane historical fact about the Gospels, you said, well, the fact that some mundane historical fact should undermine Christianity is ludicrous. But now you're telling me that a mundane historical fact is enough to buttress Christianity. I don't think you can have your cake and eat it too in that case.
I'm not trying to have my cake and eat it too. I'm simply saying that if somebody gives a true account of events, complete with small details that are incidental to the narrative, the Bible refers to very minor figures at times. Let's take, for example, Caiaphas. Caiaphas is one of the 2 high priests who is present at Jesus' trial. We don't even know his first name. He's mentioned as Caiaphas. The historian Josephus calls him Josephus Caiaphas. And that is the only indication from Josephus, and only one source, and a source writing a little later, of what this guy's name even was. And until recently, a few decades ago, there was absolutely no corroboration that there was ever a guy even named Caiaphas. Except now, not only do we have inscriptions with his name, We actually have his bones.
But Dinesh, what does this matter?
Okay, so what I'm getting at
what
is...
does this matter at all to the question?
Why does it matter?
Why does this matter?
Because if somebody is giving a true account of events, a guy comes running into this room and he goes, guess what? I've just witnessed a murder. He's going to give us a lot of accounts and a lot of detail, right? Now,
look, if somebody was trying to claim that Moses parted the Red Sea, and I said, well, how could you possibly know that's the case? And you said, well, look, we didn't have any evidence that a guy called Moses existed, but we've discovered this rock where someone wrote Moses was here.
No.
Great, okay, we know Moses existed, and maybe we know where he existed, but the actual events, the stories that are attributed to these characters are in no way supported by anything that you're saying. And that's the important thing. I think that's what people are interested in. I doubt that anybody in this room, and they can make themselves known if they're here, I don't think anybody in this room either thinks that it's important or is troubled in their skepticism by the existence of these people and the real existence of the places that are described in the Old Testament.
Right, and neither do I think that a single Christian believer in the world would be shaken by anything that you've said today. So let's really try to meet in the middle on the stuff that really matters. And I think what we're really saying, when you mentioned the parting of the Red Sea, to me, it's like, now we're talking. Because we're talking about...
These are different.
These are categorically different types of events.
I mean what you just said, these are different, because people are troubled by what I say, and they're not troubled by what you say. Because for an atheist to say that Hezekiah existed doesn't mean they can't be an atheist. For a Christian to say that Jesus didn't historically rise from the dead means that they're not a Christian.
Correct.
So these are different. They're asymmetrical.
They're asymmetrical. So let's pick up the.
So it matters. It matters when the historical elements are wrong, in terms of our grand conclusion. For the Christian, it matters when the history gets it wrong. For the atheist, it doesn't matter when the history gets it right.
What I'm saying is that if someone gives a true account of events, it is normal for the accounts to vary, to differ, in some cases to have minor contradictions. Sure. The real question is did the thing that's being described actually happen?
Okay, so
let's turn to that.
Do you think, for example, that the slaughter of the Amalekites that I mentioned before actually happened?
Probably, of course.
And if that happened, I mean, we haven't spoken about the concept of moral truth. I'd like to get the time to do so.
We can come to that, but let's stay with what I think you were about to get to, which I think is the heart of the matter that we haven't even gotten to, and that's this. The Bible is where the Bible is the most unbelievable is in its account of astounding and miraculous events.
Sure.
Right? Healings. Let's take the most outrageous event of all, which is, let's just say, bringing a guy back from the dead.
Yeah.
Presented in the Bible as a miracle.
Talking about Lazarus here, rather than
I'm talking
Jesus.
about Lazarus. Yes, Lazarus. Perfect. Now, for a Christian would say this: the Bible doesn't try to prove it, it simply asserts it. In fact, it presents it as a truth of revelation, if you will. God revealed this. It's a miracle, which is to say that it is not something that happens within the seeming known laws of nature, which we'll talk about in a moment. And the question really here is, are these kinds of miracles possible? If you say, are they implausible, or are they rare, or is it difficult to believe, the Christian is like right with you.
I think the question is, did they happen?
Did they happen, right? And here's where the Christian and the atheist are on common ground, because the Christian and the atheist would both say that based upon ordinary experience, it can't happen.
Sure.
Because otherwise it wouldn't be a miracle.
So what evidence might we have to suggest that these miraculous events as described in the Gospels did happen?
I'm saying that because the miraculous events, the Christian would simply say, if God exists, miracles are obviously possible.
Sure, I agree.
The atheist has a higher burden. And that is, the atheist has to say that whether or not God exists, which is not the topic of our debate here, miracles are impossible. Because if they're possible...
They don't have to say that.
You don't have to say that?
No, of course they don't have to say that.
You don't have to say that. You say it is possible for a man to be raised from the dead.
I can say that that's possible without thereby...
But you're saying, but this particular one didn't happen, but the event is possible.
Without thereby in any way telling us anything about whether it happened as reported to
Is
Lazarus.
it possible is it possible for the Red Sea to be parted?
Sure, why not?
It is.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean,
is it possible for
But what does that do for us? Is it possible that Muhammad flew to heaven on a winged horse?
Okay, so here's our problem.
Well, hold on. Yes or no?
Yes, of course it's possible.
Of course it's possible. So that means that, the miraculous events as described in Islam, you've got such a higher burden of proof than the Muslim does if you're having a debate with a Muslim.
But
because you have to say that's impossible.
I am not trying to prove the veracity of this or that miracle. I freely admit that I can't do that.
I'm not trying to prove the veracity of this
but
or
you
that
can't
miracle.
disprove it either.
No, of course I can't disprove it.
Exactly.
But that's not my task yet. That's like me saying, I think that, I don't know, to take a Shakespearean example, I think that, spoiler alert,
Well, we don't need a Shakespearean example.
Romeo took the poison.
Let's take an actual.
And if you said, well, hold on, how do you know that actually happened? And I said, well, you can't prove that it didn't.
Well, let's pick an actual example that pertains to Christianity. Let's talk about something I raised earlier.
We've got about 5 minutes before Q&A,
okay.
by the way.
Do you believe that there is life after death?
I don't know.
You don't have no idea.
Yeah, I'm agnostic on that.
So if I say that there's life after death, am I being unreasonable?
I don't think so.
Not at all.
It depends on your reasons.
It depends on my reasons, but
yeah.
what I'm saying is, if I were to tell you that there is no empirical way to prove this one way or the other, my faith, let's say, that there's life after death is just as reasonable as someone who says there isn't.
Sure, it depends on what the reasons that are given are, of course, but sure. That's
We're talking about the reasons that are actually available. Not the person who's giving a reason may give the best or not the best reason.
It's pedantic, but I'm happy to say yes. I just want to be careful what I say, because people might get the wrong impression of my beliefs. But yeah, sure. I mean, sure. We've got two people. One says life after death. One says not. They're both just as reasonable as each other.
They're both just as reasonable.
Sure. That could be. That
Okay,
could be
excellent.
the case.
Okay, good. I wanted to clarify that point particularly because
What's
what
this
it
got
really
to do with the truth of the Bible?
Well, all I am saying is that the claims of miracles, you and I are not going to be in a position to go back and see whether or not Jesus raised a man from the dead,
Well,
right?
it's not all you say. It's not all you're saying.
The
because
Christian is perfectly willing to take that on faith.
you think that did happen, and you're taking it on faith, and that's fine.
Yes.
More power to you. And in fact, I envy your ability to believe things despite what.
Well,
seems to
don't
me
you
like
take a lot of things on faith?
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Plenty of things on
Yeah,
faith.
well, yeah, all the time.
So all the things that you take on faith
Yeah.
are things that you think are not unreasonable, but the things that Christians take on faith are to you unreasonable because they can't be corroborated with historical evidence.
Is that what I said? I don't remember saying that.
So are the Christian beliefs on faith just as reasonable as everything that you believe on
It
faith?
can be depending on the reasons, but the veracity of the gospel accounts and the Old Testament prophecy, I think, is unreasonable to believe in. Not life after death, that's fine, you can believe that. Not like, a man called Jesus rose from the dead, fine. But the idea that the Bible comports with reality either in mythological sense, in an allegorical sense, in a moral sense, or in the sense of historicity.
Let's talk about the moral sense, since you raised it, and we'll just talk about it briefly.
I want to make sure we've got time for Q&A. But look, I can reread the text if you like. The Amalekites.
Well, let's not talk about the Amalekites, in part because here's the problem. For most Christians, the Old Testament is different than the New and is seen through the light of the New. So
but
I'm
God
not.
is the same.
If you want to go to, Dennis Prager, who has written about this from a Jewish perspective, has written about the Deuteronomy, the Book of Kings, the Amalekites.
Sure, we can bring him out
what he
later,
considers
but
to be the justifiable massacre of the Canaanites. I don't really want to go there because.
Well, I know why you don't want to go there.
Well,
because
the
it's
reason I don't want to go
unjustifiable.
there, the Old Testament is full of horrific massacres.
Yes, and
that is hold on.
Massacres which are ordained. by God.
Massacres which appear to be ordained by Yahweh directly.
Sure.
Agreed. And
Well,
which
why are you
which
saying
are,
Yahweh instead of God? Why are you
Because-
subtly trying to distance yourself from the God of the Old Testament?
Well, I'm not trying to distance myself. I'm simply trying to say that any reader.
So why is that the first time you've used the word Yahweh in this conversation?
I'll tell you why. Because there is a movement within the Bible itself that you are completely missing.
Do not think that I have come to
hold on,
abolish
hold
the
on.
law
Let me-
or the
let me-
prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen, will by any means disappear from the law until everything is accomplished. Therefore, anyone who sets aside one of the least of these commands and teaches accordingly will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Jesus said that in the Sermon on the Mount, referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy and law.
Referring to his fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy.
Old
Look,
Testament law. And what I'm referring to here is an Old Testament law, which you're now trying to distance yourself
No,
from and say that it's sort of
I'm
different to the
saying-
New
I'm
Testament.
saying that you're
That's not what Jesus thought.
I'm saying you're missing the developmental track of the Bible that is obvious to any intelligent reader. Let me give you one example of what I'm
But
talking about.
tell me about the Amalekites. Tell me what the developmental
It's not about the
trajectory
Amalekites.
of this
It's about the way that
genocide
the
is.
whole story of the Bible changes in tone and mood and message. I mean,
Help-
for example,
help me out here. Like, just tell me where, any way you like. Tell me where this fits into that trajectory.
Okay,
me
I'll tell you
this
where.
fits in.
We have just a couple minutes, guys, so let's wrap it up before the Q&A.
Just tell me.
the
just tell me where this
the
fits in.
underlying message of the Old Testament is an eye for an eye. The Amalekites are the enemies of the Israelites. The Israelites will crush them with the same venom that the Amalekites would have crushed the Israelites. That's called an eye for an eye.
Including
now,
the
hold
children,
hold on.
The children, the infants,
The children, the
cattle,
infants,
the sheep, the camels, the donkeys.
Yeah, that Dennis Prager says yes, but my point is different. You will not find that spirit
not an
at
eye for an
all in the New Testament. In fact, in the New Testament, you've got a spirit of forgiveness. So what I'm getting at is to pretend
probably
like
do
you
with some
don't have
forgiveness
this.
after I mean, seriously.
Christianity is named after Christ. It's based on Christ as a fulfillment of the Old Testament. But what does fulfillment mean? It actually means transcendence. In Abraham's time, blood sacrifices are normal, right?
that can't
when
be right,
Christ
Dinesh.
comes as a sacrifice, Christ is the Lamb. The point is, those blood sacrifices
That can't
aren't
be
necessary
right.
anymore.
Listen,
That's the Christian reading. And you keep filibustering me because you know that the Bible is showing a movement in a direction, and to miss the movement is to miss the Bible. Let's look at God in the Bible.
Hold on,
Let me
hold
make
on.
one quick
No,
point
no,
about God in the Bible.
There's nothing quick about what you're doing, Dinesh. There's nothing quick about what you're doing. I need to be allowed to respond to what you're saying. I am getting sick whenever
You're
I have these
cross-examining me
conversations.
on the justice of smiting the Amalekites. Honestly, I don't see any justice in it, but I do agree that was the eye for an eye ethic of the Old Testament that is repudiated and transformed and transfigured in the New.
I've had this conversation so many times, most recently with William Lane Craig. At least he had the gall to just tell me that yes, that was a moral thing for God to do. I get sick to death of people hand-waving away this genocide by some vague reference to the fact that Jesus came along to do something which somehow kind of undoes the immorality of it. Like, this is not an eye for an eye. This is a genocide of combatant men, innocent women, and children, and animals. Saul is punished by God for not killing all of the animals. Like
That is actually a ludicrous misreading of what's happening.
Let me just
with
make
Saul
a.
and David.
Let me just make a quick point.
Let me
just
check
make a
in
quick
just-
point. I have to make this point.
Okay.
I've got to read the text from Joshua as well.
Okay, and then we'll check in with the audience because we're probably. I think the audience is going to agree that we want this to keep going.
No, that's fine. If
Instead
we
of
wanna
going
go
to
to Q&A,
Q&A,
that's
but we'll
fine.
check
That's
in
fine.
just after Alex's point here.
I think it's important, like, read these texts for yourself. There is no way that I'm misreading this text. We know that this is what's happening. In the slaughter of Ai, that's a type of Canaanite. In Joshua, we're told that when Israel had finished killing all of the men in Ai, in the fields and in the wilderness, where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. That is to say, that we're told that this is just because the promised land was inhabited, and God's God, he's allowed to do this. So because the Israelites want that land, they have to go and chase out the Ai. So they chase them into the wilderness. They chase after them. They slaughter them in the wilderness. They then turn around, come back into the city, and kill who's left. Who's left if the combatants have run away? The women and the children. This is intolerable, and I cannot have it simply waved away.
All right, hang on.
Of Jesus.
Let me just for a second.
It can't happen. It can't keep happening.
Let's pause
You're completely blind to the irony of what you're saying.
Dinesh, can we pause for just a second?
Yeah.
Okay, everyone who wants to go to Q&A right now, make a loud noise. Everyone who wants the discussion to continue on and eat up the Q&A time, cheer. Okay, sorry guys, we're gonna let them roll through Q&A.
All right.
We might have some time.
Christianity invented the just war tradition, according to which the slaughter of women and children is out of bounds. Prior to Christianity, no one thought this. Everybody did it, and everybody today does it everywhere in the world, and we do it too. The bombing of Dresden, the bombing of Hamburg, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The incineration of women and children is the normal course of war. I just watched a World War II documentary in which they interview an old bomber, a U.S. bomber pilot, and he goes, I was given a bombing mission to hit a target. I asked the U.S. authorities, who's in the building? They said 20,000 women and children. And this guy kind of breaks down. You can watch this on Netflix. And he goes, I'm like, what the hell? You want me to kill 20,000 women and children? He goes, we're supposed to be the good guys. And he goes, but I couldn't repudiate the order. It was an order, so I did it. So what I'm getting at is
that everybody does it.
It
So
is
what's
not
God for?
ethical. It is not. But I'm simply saying, Alex, that you are a product of the Christian morality that repudiates it now. You're standing on a Christian mountain and acting like, whoa, look at these Christians. They taught you to talk like this.
Dinesh, these people did not teach me to think like that.
They did.
These people were listening to their God who was telling them to slaughter innocent women
That's
and
right.
children.
Right. The ancient Israelites were, but the ancient Israelites are not what taught you. What taught you is the 1,000-year tradition of the early Christian church.
Which came a bit too late for the Amalekites.
It came a bit too late for the Amalekites, to be sure.
Were the Israelite armies not instructed by the God that you believe in?
They were instructed by God.
And they were instructed to do things which you would now consider to be immoral, yes?
Absolutely.
So God has commanded them to do something which you now consider to be immoral, whether or not you consider it to be immoral because of the later developments of Christian ethics. God himself has told us that we must abandon our intuition that the slaughter of women and children, and by the way, when it's unnecessary in those instances to slaughter them, is wrong.
I don't view it that way. This is how I view it. Let's put it this way. Even in the ancient world, divine revelation comes into a primitive, barbaric world which is full of a lot of really bad guys.
And God says, keep going.
No,
Keep it up. You're doing such a good job.
God does not say keep going. But what God does is and again, this is called, trying to get the point of what is happening. There's slavery in this world, in the ancient world, and it is true. The Bible doesn't come in and go, we denounce slavery, we denounce the killing of women and children. It doesn't do that.
The opposite.
It actually immerses itself into an existing, admittedly barbaric culture. And what's actually going on there with the Amalekites, the Canaanites, and so on, if you just read the Old Testament, it tells you. It has to do with the displacement of polytheism with monotheism.
Oh, that's fine.
Hold on.
That justifies the murder of children and women.
I didn't say it does.
That's what you're implying.
I'm saying
Otherwise
that the
you wouldn't
way
be
it
talking about
happens historically is God takes a side. The single monotheistic God, who, by the way, in the Old Testament does not act like a monotheistic God. He acts like a tribal God. Right? He acts like the God of only the Israelites.
And so Israel's enemies... Listen to what you just said. The God that you believe in is acting like a tribal war god.
The God of the... Yes, the God that is depicted in the Old Testament is... He goes, I'm picking the Jews. Yes. I'm choosing you.
To the extent that your
enemies become my enemies,
to the extent that your male and female slaves may come from the nations around you. From them you may buy and sell slaves. You may also purchase some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clan born in your town. You can bequeath them to your children as inheritable property. This is human beings, by the way. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. So not only do we have, the description of slavery in the Old Testament, we have an explicit condoning instructions on how to do it and doing it based on race.
Well, I wouldn't say based on race because...
How else do you interpret...
First of all, racism is an invention of the modern world.
Call it tribe if you like.
Ethnicity. These are clans.
These
are militaristic
Israelite
clans.
slaves this way, and you treat non-Israelite slaves this way. By the way that the Israelite slaves are treated, we're told in Exodus 21, if you have a male slave, they're to go free after 7 years. But if you give them a wife and they have children while they're your property, then they don't go free after 7 years, only the man does. And Exodus 21 says, but if the man decides that he loves his wife and his children and his master and wants to stay, then he can say to his master he wants to stay, at which point he's taken outside, his ear is pierced like cattle, and he becomes a slave for life. Now, by the way, female slaves aren't let go after 7 years at all in the first place. Now, I understand what you're saying when you say, okay, maybe God couldn't have abolished slavery for some reason, but at least, for example, when the male slave goes free, let his wife and children go with him.
Yeah.
Why not this simple moral improvement? There is no conceivable reason that this could not have been ordained by God, but
Look,
it was not.
You have a capital argument here to be had with the rabbis, and look, there is a massive rabbinical tradition that discusses
Dinesh,
every
you're
fine
here
point,
to
as you
convince
know.
these people that the Bible is true.
But it's not my job to
I'm not a rabbi either.
isolate the Old Testament from the New and justify ancient battles that have no bearing. Let me put it this way:
And tell me how
if
specifically the New
someone were to
Testament
listen to
undoes
you,
this.
they would have no idea that the first anti-slavery movement in the world is driven by the Quakers and the evangelical Christians. They read the same Bible, but evidently they don't read it your way, because if they read it your way, they would be the prime apologists and defenders of slavery. So
Dinesh.
you have to explain why you take a universal institution.
Dinesh, when did that happen?
In every culture.
When did that happen?
When did what happen?
When did that movement first get off the ground?
It's in America, it starts shortly after the Quakers get here. So the early let's put it this way, the early anti-slavery movements are about 1710,
So
1720.
Here's two hypotheses then. One hypothesis is that God actually didn't like slavery the whole time. It just took human beings literally thousands of years to work it out, and that just so happened to coincide with the Enlightenment. That's one hypothesis. Another hypothesis is actually that the Bible does condone slavery, and that what's going on is, I think, for example, when you look at the actual verses that are being given as justification for the Christian abolitionist movement, what kind of verses are we talking about?
Well, what I'm saying is that first of all, the
Like,
Enlightenment...
it may have been Christians who did it, but they were, like, to say that they were doing it as motivated by Christianity is a different kind of claim.
It is a very significant claim because to you, the Bible exists in an interpretive tradition that has been expostulated over many centuries by Christians. They're reading that Bible. They're reading it with great care as to what it's trying to say. And the Enlightenment, far from being the origin of any of this, in fact, the racism that came out of the Enlightenment was of a species that never existed before. I mean, you think of the great philosophers like Hegel, Kant, their denunciations of blacks, for example, you'll find nothing like that in the Old Testament, leave alone the New.
And if modern Enlightenment thinkers were beholden to think that these Enlightenment thinkers were ineffable, creators of an inviolable ethic, then we'd probably have had a harder time getting rid of it, don't you think?
Well, nobody. Do you
think the abolitionist movement was helped or hindered by the existence of the verses that I've just described?
Well, I mean, I think it was hindered by them because I think that the Southern apologists of slavery appealed to those verses. To be sure, they appealed to the Old Testament verses that were pro-slavery.
Tell me where you could appeal to be anti-slavery specifically. I mean, not love your enemy, love your neighbor. Tell me specifically. Like, here's how I can put it: you're in a time machine. You go back to antebellum slavery in the American South.
Yeah.
And you find yourself on a plantation, and you say to the master of the house, you own a bunch of slaves. I don't think this is moral. I don't think you should be mistreating them. Where do they turn? And plausibly so, to justify what they're doing.
Well, the answer
They pull out
is
their
this.
Bible, and you can say to them, well, hold on, have you read this verse? Tell me the verse. Tell me where I can point this person in order to dispel them of their
So I
ideas
would
about
recommend to you a compendium of sermons that were delivered by Northern preachers in the decades leading up to the Civil War. Hold on.
I want to know what the verses
Right,
are.
so
in the
I'm
Bible.
going to give you their mode of preaching because the key to it is to understand how they use the Bible. It's not the way you do it. Even the Southern theologians weren't dumb enough to say they enslaved the Amalekites, therefore you can enslave this guy who's here from the Congo. No, the Southerners didn't use those arguments either. Your arguments are in a different species altogether. If you look at the arguments between the Northerners and Southerners over slavery, they were far more nuanced than that. Basically, you had to do something like this. The Northern theologians would say this: are we or are we not created equal in the eyes of God? Yes or no? Yes. Are we all equally in need of salvation? Yes. Does God therefore love us all equally and make salvation available to us all? Yes.
And then you flip over
and
the Old
all
Testament.
that being the case, so hold on. It takes a movement now to go
too
from this
vague.
theological truth to a political application. But I don't have to prove that this is plausible. because it already happened.
It's far too vague. It's
far too vague for you.
No.
From a skeptical compass, it's vague.
This always happens.
But I'm saying millions of people believed it.
This always
they
happens.
listened to these sermons. They acted on them.
That's because people retrospectively impart their own values.
Why do you
Bible.
think? Why do you think people in the North who had no stake in the matter signed up to fight the Civil War? Why did they do it?
I don't know.
You have no idea, right? You have no clue.
But I don't think it's because they read the Bible.
I'm saying that do you realize to what
look at the sermons that are being given. Look at the language that's being used. People talk about the Exodus story, for example. You know, the enslaved in Egypt, freed by God and brought into the promised land. And this is a story that is favored. This is a story that's favored by abolitionists to say, look at this anti-slavery spirit of something like Exodus, leaving out the fact that when the Israelites are liberated from Egypt and trying to take the promised land, they do so by slaughtering, genociding, and also then enslaving the people who were already living there. They leave out that bit. Because if they kept it in, then we'd realize that God did not have an anti-slavery essence. God had an anti-Israelite oppression sentiment.
Well,
and it's in the Old Testament specifically the Israelites whose oppression he's upset with, and not only fine with the oppression of others, but mandates the oppression of others through the Israelites.
Okay, and all I'm saying is that there is a whole tradition that involves millions of slaves, millions of abolitionist preachers, Martin Luther King. None of them, not one of them, reads this story your way.
They just don't mention it. They just don't mention it.
Right, but isn't the significance of a text determined by the reading and use to which it is put? Let's say, for example, there's a story of murder, and everybody who reads that story becomes a wonderful citizen, loves their family, and you're the only guy who goes, oh no, really, guys, you're all misreading the text. It's really about murder, guys. And Martin Luther King goes, no, slaves for hundreds of years have taken consolation in the Exodus. I mean, go down, Moses, way down to Egypt land and tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. Yep. To you, this is gobbledygook, because guess what the Israelites did next? And then Martin Luther King goes...
What did they do next?
Well, my point...
Like, what I would say to Martin Luther King, if I was trying to make
I agree about the description in the Bible. I'm simply saying that...
It's not a description, Dinesh.
A Christian book has got to be understood in the way Christians understand it. And if you come out with a quote... Let's just say, for example...
Don't put it in scare quotes. Like, you can say, go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. And if I was trying to make a theological point, I would say, and then do what? What did they do next? Like, don't get me wrong. I am more than happy that Martin Luther King was able to make a theological case for the abolition of slavery. Fine, but I would say that he was...
Not for the abolition of slavery, but for civil rights.
He was misreading the text. Yeah, you're right.
We have about 5 minutes, guys.
Not the other way around. It's like, we have to ask who's misreading the text. And let's just suppose for a moment that you could point to me, which you still haven't done, to a single verse, even in the New Testament, which tells me that slavery is a bad thing. Which, by the way, St. Paul writes in... I can't remember which. I wish I could remember which letter it is. But you'll know what I'm talking about, where he writes, "Slaves, be obedient to your masters, not just the good ones, but also to the cruel," or the froward, as the King James has it. It's like, if it were the case that even if you could, which I'd still love for you to do, point to a single verse in the New Testament that tells me that slavery is actually not so good, the fact that so obviously God is okay with it in the Old Testament means that even if you could do that, the best we're left with is that we have a text here which can say one thing on one day and another thing the next.
If you don't understand, if you don't read,
I'm sure I bribed more people than that on the way in. So.
If you don't read the Bible in the way that the Christians do, then I'm trying to understand what is you're essentially a kind of a new interpreter who's saying that, first of all, texts are always open to interpretation, right? So if I say, for example, the meaning of the Oedipus story is the quest for truth, no matter where that takes you. And that is the meaning of the Sophoclean hero. The Sophoclean hero is isolated, Antigone, Oedipus. They hold on to a truth no matter what, however unpleasant, however dangerous. It often takes them to their destruction or their death. And that is the way in which let's just say a student of ancient Greek drama, reads this work. And that is the way that the work has always been read. You come along and say, let's just say you're Sigmund Freud, and you go, no, to me, the work really means something completely different. People have a secret lust for their moms, and this is repressed. Now, it's a very interesting interpretation, but it's sort of like I'm telling you, well, no Christian reads it that way. You're like, but there it is in the text.
Sometimes, Dinesh, a genocide is just a genocide.
I'm not denying the facts as described. It's the wiping out of the Amalekites.
Yeah, as ordained by the God that you believe in.
As ordered by Yahweh.
So just to ask a direct yes or no question, I'd appreciate a direct yes or no to this. The God that you believe in is the moral author of the universe. Morally justifiably commanded the slaughter of innocent children and women. Yes or no?
In the Old Testament, yes.
There you have it. So now we've covered historical, metaphorical, allegorical, and now moral truth, and I suppose it can only be up to the audience to decide whether they think that this is true.
Fair enough. Okay.
All right, everyone, let's do a big round of applause for Dinesh and Alex. Wow.
Thank you. Sorry about the questions. Sorry. We'll be around afterwards.
No, it's all good. We do have poster printouts for all of you in the lobby, free of charge, and you can all get them signed by Alex and Dinesh. That'll be joining us in the lobby. And everyone on YouTube, thank you so much for stopping by to watch. I think we peaked at 2,000 viewers live, so that's excellent for Pangburn. Things are growing really fast. Make sure you guys subscribe and drop a like button before you head out of the stream. Thank you, everyone, so much, and I'll hang out with you guys in the lobby. I'll see you there.
And questioners, come. They'll be. You can ask them there.
Yes. Ask your questions in the lineup. We do have a bit of time, so thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dinesh.
All right, appreciate it.